Grainlow. The question is the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Grainlow for his constructive comments and respect the fact that everyone in this House takes the issue of aviation security very seriously, and I thank him for his comments and his constructive approach to the bill before the House. And there are very good reasons for very sound security whilst maintaining the viability of airports that differ so greatly around Australia. And we've always seen different ways that there have been risks and challenges ever since air transport became so widespread and has brought us closer together. There's also been those who've wanted to use some form of terror to disrupt that unity and opportunity. We saw the striking example of this at 9/11, and there's been numerous examples in the past. I think as far back as in 1933, an aircraft was destroyed by a bomb. I think it was nitroglycerin at the time that was the probable cause, and it was linked to apparently a Chicago gangland kingpin was the suspect, but the case remains unresolved. It was the first proven act of air sabotage in the history of commercial aviation. And the first example of in-flight bombing was in 1962, with a Continental Airlines aircraft blown up by a passenger over Iowa in the US. More recently, the Lockerbie tragedy, where Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed by a bomb on board and crashed into a very quiet little Scottish village, killing all passengers plus 11 people on the ground. And that's why we take aviation security seriously, everyone in this House. As every new incident has occurred, there have been corresponding improvements to airport security. And there's also been a change and a rise in different forms of terrorism around the world. We are now all used to the significantly increased measures at our major international gateways such as Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and those around the world. And as incidents occur, there is constant innovation and new technology available in the security measures applied to the new threats and responding to the new threats. A clear example of this was following the 2009 failed al-Qaeda bombing attempt in the US, and full body scanners, as we know, were introduced. And these enhanced security measures have been responsible for preventing incidents right here in Australia. In recent times as well, we've seen a plot to blow up a flight to Abu Dhabi, foiled by security procedures at Sydney Airport, saving hundreds of lives. So all of us in this House, I believe, understand why enhanced security arrangements at airports are so important, why they exist and what they're meant to prevent. However, as we've heard from previous speakers and as we know as rural and regional members, not all airports around Australia are the same, and not all airports face the same level of risk. And we have relied on the recommendations of experts in relation to the content in this bill, managed by the Department of Home Affairs. It's important to ensure that security plans are fit for purpose for lower risk, for the risk that exists at each individual airport, dotted right around Australia, whilst we continue to preserve the integrity of airport security systems. Reducing the regulatory burden on smaller aviation providers and on local airports is really critical whilst we maintain our airport security system. But we do know there's a variety of smaller airports right around Australia, and there are those that we actually cannot expect to have the same or similar levels of security that we see in that of Sydney or Melbourne. And in so many instances, we see different levels of risk, and we need different risk-based approaches to this. As well, we want to make sure that the regulatory burden and cost, there is always a cost, on regional airports and other participants in the regional aviation industry are actually appropriate for that level of risk at that particular point and the services provided at that particular location. We need to balance the need for aviation security whilst maintaining a viable regional aviation sector. for those, I see the member for Grey sitting beside me. He will expand on this further, but with the smaller airports around Australia, as we see, particularly those in rural, regional and remote areas, they're frequently owned by a local government, and they frequently have to deal with the additional costs that go with any new imposition that makes it difficult for them to continue to provide the services that are so critical in our areas in rural, regional and remote Australia. But the bill will allow the Secretary of Home Affairs or their delegate to give a model transport security program to a lower risk aviation operator, so that they don't have to go through a particular process to develop their own, again reducing the cost and the red tape. But they are required by law. A participant in the industry is required by law to have a TSP, and it sets out the measures and procedures they have in place to meet that regulatory requirement. Now, the Department of Home Affairs undertakes rigorous compliance activities to make sure that participants meet their obligations to maintain the appropriate level of risk. And there is broad support across the industry, as we've heard, for the measures in this bill. And currently the law requires all industry participants to maintain a comprehensive and unique TSP. And that's all aerodromes, regional airports and regional air operators. That's despite the differences in the risk, in the size, in the sophistication, in the complexity of their operations. And we know that there are some airports that have very few flights that come and go, and they may be freight-based equally. So we see a diversity around this great nation that we have. And I look at the Busselton-Margaret River Airport in my electorate. This has been significantly upgraded in recent years by contributions from the then Liberal state government as well as our federal government. And I'm looking forward to the development that will occur in the region as this airport gets up and running both in freight and passenger services. We contributed as a federal government to the upgrading the length of the runway and enabling it to take 747s, A320s and A330s. And this really increases the great commercial opportunities as well as the planning and work on a freight hub. Given the products that come out of my southwest, this is a great opportunity. These improvements will allow services from eastern capitals, international destinations, from places like China, Indonesia and other Asian cities, as well as the exports to go out, whether it's dairy, whether it's chilled or fresh meat, abalone and marron that we see, the flowers, the fruits, the vegetables, the truffles from the region, the broader southwest region, as well as packaged products to all sorts of markets, including China, the UAE, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, all sorts of countries. It is an exciting and new development and has the potential to supercharge our region in terms of exports to the world of the best quality products, and to bring visitors directly to our beautiful southwest region, including the Margaret River and Busselton region, our Geograph region. And of course, this airport is owned by the City of Busselton. And when I look at where the airport is currently at, we have to make sure that the future of the airport is not compromised by overburdening that particular airport at this time with the security requirements. Under this legislation, the Department of Home Affairs, as I said, can lessen that red tape burden and provide a particular risk and TSP to that airport for its current requirements. It can also then at a different time upgrade those requirements as the risk level change and as the activities of that airport change. So if the department assesses the airport as a lower risk, which it currently is, it could be given a secretary-issued, so the work's done basically, TSP, where the administrative burden in preparing a bespoke, a specific one, is actually proportionate is not proportionate to the security outcomes. So I look at the other parts of what's contained in this bill, and setting out the minimum. That a TSP will set out the minimum security requirements that the participant must comply with to safeguard against unlawful interference. That's the critical part that the Department of Home Affairs will get right, but they must be appropriate for the operation or locations covered by the program. Member for Grey, you'll be very pleased about that part of it, appropriate. And of course, the TSP means that the participant has to have the relevant procedures to manage and coordinate security within the operation, and other parties as well. Technology, equipment and procedures that will be used are covered, and a plan for how participants will respond to any security incidents. And this is really important, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the Australian Airports Associations have supported the proposals in this bill, and we also know that there are, the TSPs that are already there can be used as a model by the actual secretary, and this is a very clear and simple way of reducing that regulatory burden, the red tape. And I think all members of this House, and particularly the member for Grey sitting next to me, is aware of the layer upon layer of red tape that we hear about from whether it's small, medium enterprises or, in this instance, a small regional airport. And the amount of frustration that they express to us on a regular basis about the mountains of paperwork. And we know that some of these are very small operators, and they may not have the dedicated number of people to be able. They cannot afford to do so in many instances with the continuous rise in the amount of paperwork that's required. Yes, they will meet their security arrangements, and they need to, and they know they need to. However, we need to make sure that these airports remain viable. And we've got, I just looked at the numbers of airports around Australia, and they vary considerably in not only their location but in the types and numbers of services that are actually provided. In my part of the world, the Busselton Airport during the boom in the mining industry in the southwest, Rio Tinto had flights coming out of there with the fly-in, fly-out workers, and they still do. We have a number of charter flights that come and go from the area, but that in no way resembles what would happen at Perth Airport, Sydney Airport or some of the major airports. So I commend the bill to the House, as has been said previously, one that's supported broadly by the industry, one that was supported as well by the, I think a Senate inquiry had a look at this as well and supported this and recommended the passage of this bill, and I commend it to the House.